Testing, hello, hello. Can everyone hear us? We're live online, right? Perfect. Okay, thank you everyone for coming today. I'm Lily, I'm the manager of advancement, and we work closely with all of our grads, all of our 75,000 alumni across the globe. So we're very excited to have our Alumni Speaker Series today. And I just want to start us off by doing a land acknowledgement, acknowledging that we're on the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. Also recognizing that Laurentian's located on the traditional lands of the Atikameksheng Anishinaabeg, and that's the greater city of Sudbury, which includes the traditional lands of Wahnapitae First Nation. So I want to extend our deepest respect to the First Nation, Inuit, Métis peoples, of a sign of continued relationship that we will support Laurentian University's Truth and Reconciliation Task Force recommendations. Miigwech for that. And before we begin, I do want to introduce Pascua to come up and do an opening prayer and a drum song for us.
Danse Ani, good morning. Today I will be saying a prayer that was taught to me by my teacher at a bull in immersion when I was growing up in Alberta. And this prayer asks the Creator to watch over everyone that's here, but not only everyone that's here, but everything in creation. No tawinan gise manto wichianan mena ganawemenan anoch ga kisagak nianan getawamanasak na peoak na pesasak iskoewak isquesisak ekwa kakio gotagak isinawakota askik getatamanan hi. The drum song I'll be singing for you this morning or this afternoon is also in my language, Nehiyawak, the Plains Cree, and it's a song that we sing across Turtle Island to mark gatherings and events such as this, and that everyone comes together in a good way, and we all walk away with good teachings and good feelings.
Beautiful, thank you. OK, puis j'aimerais aussi prendre un petit moment pour reconnaître la chambre qu'on est dans ici. So just want to take a moment to recognize the Indigenous Sharing and Learning Center and this beautiful space that we get to gather in today. And so now and next, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lynn Wells, the university's president.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. First, I want to thank Pasqua for that wonderful song. Every time Pasqua sings, I feel great for an hour or so afterwards. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you so much for being here today, for joining us, those of you in person and those of you online as well. This is our second alumni webinar, and we're very excited to have Kristan and Neil, and I'll say a word about them in just a moment. Ceci est la deuxième session de cette série visant à poursuivre notre engagement à mettre en lumière nos anciens et anciennes qui influencent l'industrie, les communautés et la société en général. We're very honored to welcome, I guess I can say, my friend, Kristan Straub, a proud Laurentian University graduate whose career has been distinguished by leadership in the mining sector, Indigenous relations, environmental stewardship, and community development. Kristan completed his education here at Laurentian, obtaining a Bachelor of Science in Geology, before moving into a career that has taken him across the mineral resources landscape, building partnerships, championing Indigenous inclusion, and contributing to the future of responsible mining in Canada. This past year, we were honored to bestow upon Kristan an Honorary Doctorate from Laurentian University. His deep ties to Sudbury and to this institution make his insights particularly meaningful for our students, alumni, and community members, and I'm sure you'll all learn lots from what he has to say today. And I'd also like to welcome another great friend of Laurentian, Neil Milner, who will be facilitating the conversation with Kristan. Neil attended Laurentian University, where he obtained his Bachelor's of Mining Engineering. He is currently a professional engineer with the Professional Engineers of Ontario and is a registered project management professional. With almost 30 years of experience in the industry, Neil is the president of Zagamak Mining Limited Partnership, which is a 100% Anishinaabe-owned corporation, and is also the owner of the 4M Mining Consulting Incorporated. I really want to thank Neil and Kristan for giving us their time today. I know this will be an engaging discussion. And with that, I'll hand off to Neil. Thank you.
Great. Can you guys hear me all right? I struggle with the mic from time to time, so if I drain off, just let me know. I've got a couple notes here to get started. I had the opportunity to have a great conversation with Kristan last week, and was amazed to find out that our careers really started here at Laurentian at the same place. Jen and him were neighbors with my wife, who's also a proud Laurentian grad, and my son Pat's also here, another mining engineering student. Yeah, so we spent quite a bit of time in we started out in the same place, and really our orbits didn't cross for a number of years. So I think it's important for the students to know that there are many paths that you can take, and you can always end up at the same great place. And we're fortunate to be back here at Laurentian. But you're not here to talk or hear about me. We're here to talk about Kristan. And so I sort of started at our beginning, but let's start at your beginning, and tell us a little about your career, what brought you to Laurentian, and how your time here shaped your career.
Certainly, Neil, thank you very much for that. And when I was struck when we had the initial discussion, thinking back that 98 was a great year, and then as I think through and some of the other grads that came afterwards, there are many great years out of Laurentian grads that have come through it, and through that anastomosing career path, you cross paths with them again. I see Nicole here, who I was a TA for, who's gone on to have a fantastic career here at Laurentian University. But when you ask what brought me here to Laurentian University, as a young kid, I was passionate about rocks. I grew up in Falconbridge, and the company, Falconbridge at the time, had developed this park called Centennial Park. And in the park was where, not all, but some of the old mining equipment went. So there are muckers and slushers up there. There are little ore trains, and as kids we used to go across and play in those. And I was always fascinated by the shiny rocks. The other thing that was there at that time, the trains were coming in and out of Falconbridge. there were ore samples that would fall off, and along the railroad tracks you could collect them. And that fueled a passion about rocks in me. And my grandfather, who was also deeply connected with Laurentian University, he had a passion for rocks as well, and he collected rocks and made these beautiful stone gardens. And I was always enthralled to learn about the rocks from what my grandfather had known. So I got a rocks and minerals book as a kid and got all of those things. But I would say there was a really pivotal moment sort of at the end of high school. I was a very athletic student in high school, played just about every sport that would let me onto the team, and played a lot of extracurricular sports as well. But I had a conversation with my mother-in-law, and I was headed down the direction of physiotherapy and sports medicine. That was the direction I wanted to go in. And my mother-in-law said to me, she said, "But you recognize that's an all indoor work." And I was a very outdoors person. I enjoy hunting and fishing and being out. And so, and through this discussion, she married up the discussion about what I liked, which was rocks and minerals, and learned a lot about it on my own through self-learning. And she said, "Well, why don't you take a geology course? You're enrolled in science. Why don't you enroll in a science program?" So I did do that, and I went down that path. So I had a long period of time where I was, either through family in connection with my grandfather, through extended family with the lady who's now my mother-in-law, Ruby, who was the manager at Continuing Ed just around the corner here. It's no longer there, but she was here for a lot of years as well. So that was how I got into coming here to study. And I would say the attracting thing afterwards was a number of the staff and the faculty in the department. We had a very welcoming department, and at that time we were a small group of people. So 6 people who started off in the same year, we went all the way through to the end. And 2 of them happened to be, one was a childhood friend from Falconbridge, who was also here in geology, and another one was a childhood grade school friend from the grade school I went to. So half the class, we were already friends from the time that we were like 5 or 6 years old. And so that's really what brought me and kept me here at Laurentian through that period of time, and then instilled the passion for the love of geology and rocks. And then afterwards, that was fueled by great professors and faculty and staff here.
Great, thank you. Okay, were there any of those faculty, staff, your professors that were mentors to you that you've either thought of throughout your career or stayed in touch with?
Yeah, there are 2, and I mentioned his name earlier on. Professor Dr. Harold Gibson was one, and Professor Richard James, but we always called him Dick and Harold on a one-on-one basis. Harold was my thesis supervisor the first time, and the second time as I was making my way through my postgraduate work at that time. Both of them were very instrumental. Harold is, if anybody's met him, is an extremely passionate geologist, and at that time for young geologists, he was great. But I would also take a step further to, I always think it's important when you create mentors or you create the identity, and Nicole would appreciate this, I think, as well, is that first year geology was taught by Dr. David Pearson at that time. And I don't think out of anyone that I've met had a more attractive delivery than David Pearson did, Dr. Pearson did. And to see him still out here with Dr. Beckett at graduation ceremonies, handing out trees for environmental reclamation, like the work that those 2 gentlemen have done, again, leaders in their space, but really throughout my university years, through the 5 years, or probably 7 now, if I think about it a little farther, it was really Dick James and Harold Gibson that kept me going through. And Dick did a lot of work, and I remember being one of the only students in one of his classes, so it was a good amount of time together, one-on-one.
Yeah, it's great to see the growth that's happened at Laurentian. I understand you had the opportunity to tour the new engineering building and see the new facility. And with so many more students, maybe you could tell us a bit about your transition from school into the start of your career.
Certainly. I happened to get that same tour today. It was a fantastic tour, getting down to one of the labs where it's all open rock cut below, seeing the water coming down, and the exposure that the students had. We at the time, would go to Science North and have a look in the cavern or walk through the tunnel. But that transition from here, I was fortunate, and I'll say that I was very fortunate to graduate once in '98 at that time, and wasn't a great period of time in the market. It was absolutely terrible. And I was fortunate to, start a master's program, which I didn't finish, by the way, but to start that program and work for the Ontario Geological Survey, which is hosted in the Willett Green Miller Centre here, just down the street. And from a fundamental perspective, working with the government and having access to the university at the time was instrumental in my career in terms of progression. I got to do a lot of scientific work, and then, I think like any other kid growing up in a small town, we talked about that. I grew up in Falconbridge. It's only ever going to be about 500 people because there's no more room to build houses. But I did not want to spend my life in Falconbridge and in Sudbury, for that matter. Nor did I want to study nickel. That was not. Those were two things that were high on my list, and I didn't succeed in either of them in my career. We talk about that anastomosing path that comes back. But I went on to work out in British Columbia for a period of time, and it was there where I had my first experience with another mining cycle in mergers and takeovers. I was working for a company called Caminco. My wife Jennifer and I were looking at buying a house up in Squamish, which anybody now, if you try to do that, it's unbelievably expensive. We think land and property are expensive in this part of the world, but there it's crazy. But just due to the circumstance of Teck purchasing Caminco, we found ourselves on the right side of the transaction saying, there's work for you, we're going to continue on with these programs, but there's going to be a pause while we go through this transaction. And during that period of time, Jennifer was teaching here in Sudbury, and I came back, and another person who's affiliated with Laurentian University, I believe still is an adjunct professor, Catherine Farrow, hired me on to work at INCO at a period of time. And I put to use the skills that I had learned with the Ontario Geological Survey in mineralogy and scanning electron microscope work and a bunch of research and all the nerdy stuff that you do at that time, but very much foundational work for the rest of the work that you do as a career. So those early jobs of spending time being the person on the machine, running the research, running the analysis, and then assembling and synthesizing the products that come out of that were very much the keys to my success later on through life in understanding mineralogy, metallurgy, metallurgical response, recovery, and all those things are the things that drive business success in the mining and mineral processing industry. So, those early foundational years really drove that part. The other part that drove why I was here in Sudbury is that during that period of time that I came back, my wife and I had our first child. So, and we anchored here in Sudbury for a number of years, and during that period of time was fortunate. I went from INCO to work for Falconbridge on the opposite side, and was just very fortunate to participate in the discovery of the Nickel Rim South deposit and the discovery of some of the additional lenses that are currently in operation now at Fraser Morgan. So for the better part of 20 years, the impact of working with those teams and making those discoveries had a direct impact and benefit here in Sudbury through that time. You think of the jobs, the economic impact. And so, again, very formative learnings at a young age when working with a company. And I was just very fortunate to work for some great people in those companies that sponsored that knowledge acquisition, sponsored that risk-taking, and enabled and empowered me to start to have the ability to make decisions at a younger age in my career. And then that just grew and snowballed. So, from great mentors here at the university to great mentors in work, and ultimately that led me through a career that has spanned working across all continents in many commodities, not all commodities, but in most base metal and some precious metal commodities. So, yeah.
So, that's 28 years of mining, or so in a nutshell. But a lot has changed since we went to school here. And as the mining industry has evolved, leadership has had to evolve as well. How have the changes in mining, I guess, impacted the way that you lead, or maybe changed the way that you lead?
I would say the first biggest change is the level of engagement with community now. And that's a significant change. When I started my career, I came out of a background in geology. I wanted to be an exploration geologist. I wanted to work on all those continents that I had the opportunity to do. And I wanted to work on successful projects. But being in exploration and the grassroots exploration, I was excited by flying around in planes and helicopters, like many young people are excited to do, especially on the exploratory side. when here in Canada at that time, you could go in and explore in areas that were known as white zones. There was no mapping of any sorts in it. There was aerial photography from surveillance planes, but there was really no other cartography that, from a southern or a western-based perspective, that we had at that time. So, as an individual who was working in exploration and going into these areas, and one of them was with Cominco, some of them were with Falconbridge, and many of them were with the Ontario Geological Survey at the time, you're the first person on the ground, or the first of, in a recent history, of people being on the ground. So, and in my career, I was always fortunate to work with companies who held community and Indigenous relations in high regard. So we would go into the communities and we would meet with the communities. We would discuss with the communities what our plans were ahead of time, which wasn't commonplace back then. Back then, the way that rights worked in terms of the land is, as an explorer, you had the right to go in, you had the right to strip, you had the right to drill. You could do all of those things without consulting anybody. As a matter of fact, you could park a drill probably over here on the Idlewild, and you could say that, hey, this was mining law at that point in time. Not to say that it was right, but that was what was in place at that time. So the action, again, of having great mentors that you know, were, I would say, forced upon us the practices of connecting with community were really the fundamental, again, base learning parts in my career. But that, you know, was founded in my family's history of being First Nation individuals as a family. So that tradition and respect for the land had always been instilled. And then being a First Nation individual myself never lended any of the barriers to going in and speaking to communities, because it was something that growing up I had felt at ease with, and then that naturally just transitioned into the workforce as I came along. And again, in a period of time where it wasn't something that was first and foremost and forefront of the discussion. And I would say from both sides, both from an industry perspective and then from a First Nation or Indigenous population on the engagement side, I know there was a lot of reticence to engage with exploration companies or with governments at that time for the work that we were doing.
So I have to say, in my career, I don't know that I've met anyone with the experience that you have in building relationships and partnerships with Indigenous communities. What are some of the lessons that you've learned? Some of the biggest successes that you've had that you could share with us?
I would certainly say, one of the things in the mining industry and the extractive resource industry as a whole, we're not at a level of, I would say, high functionality yet from an engagement perspective. We're getting there. There's more work to be done on that. But one of the things that really picks me is that we say we're consulting with stakeholders. And I think that's a fair and broad general statement. But when it comes to First Nation, Inuit, and Indigenous populations, the rights holders. So there's a significant, it's not a subtle difference, there's a significant difference. And I think when we were talking about it earlier, I had in my mind, I'd heard this past week somebody describing mining development or project development, me like your neighbor coming in and starting to dig in a pool and say, yeah, we're putting in a pool. You get to use it on Thursday afternoons between the hours of 3 to 5. So the work is invasive work, and there are rights holders that are out there. So in my line of work anyhow, engaging with rights holders and developing that relationship has been a fundamental core part of it. So first at the early stages of exploration, when we went in and we would meet with either the communities or the landholding corporations that existed depending on the environment, or even here in Ontario with some of the First Nations and some of the regional councils that we've worked with over periods of time. I think those are all things that were instilled from a young age, from a family perspective, on how to treat people with respect and how to engage with respect, and then carried that through from work. But I would say, aside of being on the front line from an exploration perspective, after we made a discovery and we're looking to develop that Nickel Rim South deposit, I can still remember, the first couple of community meetings at the Skeed, it was at the Legion in Skeed, when we were conducting the community. I wouldn't even say it was consultation at that point in time. It was community information sessions. If I go back 25 years ago at that time, and we were really informing the community of what was going to happen, not consulting and engaging in design. And then fast forward to 25 years later, now we're engaging with either rights holders in First Nations or regional groups, and engaging on understanding what are the things that are important for development, and what's a path to obtaining consent for development in a region. And I think that's a very important discussion and an extremely important evolution over the last 25 years. And that evolution has come, I would not say easy for many parties. And I think there's still some parties out there in our industry, sadly, that have to make that journey today. I would say they're far and few between, but in general, there's a lot of progress that's going on, and there are a lot of people now that work from a fundamental perspective of engaging rights holders early on and including rights holders in the decision-making process. So I know, as we spoke about, maybe I'll finish there and I can introduce the other part a little bit later on.
Yeah, I may be leading into it, but
yeah.
So your community is Henvey and Inlet, which has seen some pretty significant development over the course of the last few years, and I think to me is a great example of development being leveraged to create generational wealth for a community. What are some other ways that you can see, or maybe speak about that maybe a bit first, but then also other mutually beneficial agreements or partnerships that you see that are grounded in respect for communities and with the goal towards moving beyond immediate wealth and creating that lasting support for the communities.
From a personal perspective, Henvey Inlet offered me the development of the wind farm down there offered me a completely different perspective. I was accustomed to being on the side of the resource developer at that point in time, and being the person or persons or the team charged with creating the information and disseminating the information. And I'd spent a lot of years in my career in doing that. But being a band member at Henvey Inlet, I was the person who was being consulted with on the other side of the table. So I found that a very informative position to be in, to learn and understand about the process that our community was going through from a community development perspective, from some ideas from a very limited number of people in the community had this wonderful idea and were connected with renewable energy providers at a period of time and said, hey, there's a fantastic wind resource that exists on the east coast of the Georgian Bay, and there's a fantastic opportunity for development. It didn't happen overnight. There was a whole process that went through for the community to decide, is this something we want to go down, and how do we go down? Who's the right partner to work with? Because it was community-led and in partnership with industry, there wasn't a fixed proponent from the industry side. So the community had a decision to make on the who they were going to work with. And the community had a great opportunity to I would say, interview or evaluate who those different groups were. And ultimately it was Pattern Energy who was selected at the end, who's no longer Pattern Energy, but there's been an evolution there. But through that period of time, what I saw as a community member was community members engaged in exploring and understanding traditional knowledge and using Indigenous traditional knowledge or First Nation traditional knowledge in the area on how to go about evaluating the potential environmental impacts. I've made some great friends over the years who've worked on that. And the industry ultimately hired in members of our community to go out and collect that information, to conduct that work. And it's amazing to see the growth in community members through that period of time. Not to say that they didn't have the opportunities before and continue on their own career paths, but to see the growth that's come out of that, and now to be in a position now as a First Nations community where we're viewed as leaders in the renewable energy sector for a wind farm that's developed down and through here, and now taking the next step on what are additional resources that we can deploy or additional business models that we can utilize to further benefit the community and further participate in the renewable energy space and the renewable energy market. And I think that's been a wonderful process. And I would share that along the way, our communities evolved. Our communities evolved through adopting various land codes in that period of time, and membership codes for how members make decisions and who gets to make the decisions and how they get to happen. and that again been consulted on a regular basis. So I think our community's done a great job in doing that, and I've taken a lot of that as an individual through that period of time, and applied that, what I've learned as a person being consulted with, applied that knowledge to work, and that's been a fundamental part in my growth as an individual in our business, and taking those learnings back and forth. The other part that I would say, which was a critical moment for me, although I didn't recognize it at the time, but taking on a leadership role at an operation in northern Quebec, the Raglan operation, it was the first mining development project that signed an impact benefits agreement with an Indigenous party, in this case, the Inuit of the communities of Saluit, Kanjasujuak, as well as the regional government, not the regional government, but the economic development group of Makivik in northern Quebec. That was a contract, and the predecessors that came along before me, they had used that contract to work. However, at the period of time when I started through there, we had challenging relations with, if that one, we can just share one.
It's okay. I'm not sure what's going on, but here, let me just do one little quick change here.
Okay. I probably speak loud enough for everybody in here, but those online, it's going to be a long way away.
I figure if everyone's here to talk to you, that you should have the best working mic.
That's good.
Let's try that.
But we had a period of time where the engagement from the business side was struggling. We were struggling to get quorum at our meetings. We were struggling. And so, as a leader, when you see that your contractual relationship, and at the basic fundamental level, I don't think that we should contractualize Indigenous relations. That's not the point of where this is going. But at a basic fundamental, we have a contract to operate, and a contract to ensure that the social benefits that are accruing to the rights holders within the region is honored. And so as we explored that, what I found out was, we had not honored our contract for a period of time. Yes, we made payments as we should. Yes, we made best efforts for employment. And it's easy to sit back and say, well, we're doing all of these things, but we're not meeting our thresholds and our targets. So we as a leadership team asked the questions, well, why are we not doing that? What are we not doing in our contract that honors that and enables us to meet the objectives that are spelled out within that contract? And so in order to find the answers, we had to ask the hard questions from the community of why are we not able to do this? How do we solve problems for that? And that took a lot of listening to understand where we were failing, and to look at it as a challenge, not only to say, well, we're doing our level best here and this is all we can get done. That's it. This is the cards we're dealt with. We took it from a perspective of, I understand where current performance is. We'd like to improve our performance. How can we engage in doing that? And so many of the things that we'd heard out of it, and listened to it, were all within our control to change. So we made the organizational changes for ensuring that we had, in this case, we had Inuit leaders in the right roles, Inuit supervisors, we had Inuit trainers. So we created an environment and an ecosystem to attract more workers to come in, and more workers that were not going to get trained by some from a Southerner. We had successful Inuit within our business, and those individuals wanted to contribute. So they grew that, and I'm happy to say it wasn't under my leadership, but one of the individuals that we put into one of those roles and gave a leadership opportunity, now a senior leader in that organization. So to see that evolution over the last 10 years since that individual started in that role has just been fantastic. And I think that's one of the key things from either Indigenous groups or First Nations, is seeing the leaders in their community and seeing people be successful often begets success amongst itself. It's aspirational. Like as a kid, I was always enthralled with sports, as I said, and I had a poster of Alwyn Morris in my bedroom wall, which said, if you have it in you to dream, you have it in you to be able to succeed. And that was something that stuck with me. So in listening, creating the opportunities, we see a whole bunch of success. And there was another, I would say, really pivotal moment. We had a young lady who, and quite frankly, the entry-level jobs are janitorial jobs, they're kitchen jobs. They're often the lowest skill, but that's the easiest way in. And so I was meeting, and much like the doors across from here, probably about the same distance, my door was at the top of the stairs, and people coming out of the dry. The dry is where the change house for the workers that they come in and out of. It's dry so that they can dry their clothes. But as they'd come out of there, they would walk down and I would see them. And so this lady was coming down, and I was working after dinner, like I do often, but she said, how do I get your job? And I said to her, I said, what do you want to do? Tell me a little bit about yourself. And we went through the discussion and about her journey and her history, and she was happy to work at the site. But she said, I'd like to do that. And I said, well, what do you want to do? She said, well, I think I'd like to start working in the industrial side. So we enrolled her into what we had as a Stope school at the time. And this young lady has grown from, again, at an entry-level position with good mentors and great teachers all the way through to now she's the person who is running one of the new remote mines. She's not the mine manager, but she's the person running the dispatch, the ore movement, the ore control. And I think the opportunity is there if you put into place the key measures. And one of the key things for us at that time was building the training that's around. It's easy for companies or for businesses to say, Anil, you don't have your GED. Why don't you come back and have a chat when you have your GED? I can only do so much here. We took it on to teach people the basics of literacy and numeracy and get them adequately trained so they could be functional for learning in their environment, and then put great resources so that they could learn the technical aspects of their job. And then people succeed. So if you create those conditions for success, you're able to do that with people.
Okay, so thank you for that. So you just spoke to creating opportunities for people. Currently, for our young students and our young professionals, one of the biggest opportunities is going to be in the potential for critical minerals here in Ontario. Can you speak a little bit about generally how you see that moving forward and what those opportunities could be?
Certainly, you're an engineering grad. It's been a long time as a leader in business. Our world needs more engineers. We need more engineers, but we also need more skilled trades individuals and skilled people. But what the skilled person is doing today has really changed. And we can talk about it from a critical minerals perspective, on the side from an extractive side, but also on the technology side. The technology that we all have, I don't have my phone in my pocket, but that you have in your phone in your pocket, where the minerals come from, the minerals that are required for the technology that we use today is fundamentally something that, the supply chains around the world. And I know that we won't get into the supply chain discussion too much, but we need more of these particular minerals. And Canada as a nation in the 1980s was a world leader. We sit here in Sudbury, and for many of you who know, I saw very recently in an article somewhere, somebody was saying, well, there's lots of copper in Sudbury, we should have a great big penny. They're just not old enough to remember the big penny that was up there beside the big nickel at the time. So although it's a great idea, what's old is new again. But from a critical minerals perspective, we had processing technology and we had processing capability. We hear of China stopping gallium and germanium exports. It used to be produced out of the zinc plant in Kidd Creek at the time. We no longer have a zinc plant in Timmins today that produces those minerals. So for our young students and our young graduates that are coming out, and young professionals who are out in the world today as it is, there's an opportunity as the global supply dynamics have shifted in favor of the processing. And it's not just minerals, it's materials as well. It's one thing to have access to the minerals, but the materials and the processing for those materials and the transition from taking it at an elemental state into creating the products that are going to be used for our everyday lives, whether those are magnets or for accelerometers or magnets for your car or for the electric drive motors, or the bits that connect the Internet of Things that live in our house today and everywhere else that they are. The processing of that, we are beholden to offshore supplies from decades of globalization. And I'm not an anti-globalization individual, but when that advantage gets used from a political perspective, we have to see it today from what it creates from an opportunity in North America, in Canada, as a leader in minerals. Today, we have the knowledge for processing. We had done it for decades. However, to go forward with it, we're going to have to change the recipe that we used back in the 80s from an engagement perspective with rights holders and communities and stakeholders. So that is an extremely important part of this as we go down that path to dissociate ourselves with a supply chain that is being held hostage or used against us in terms of trade wars, and then now incorporate that into new supply chains. And I think we can't be everything and be all to everyone, meaning that I don't think that we can supply every little bit of an element and manufacture all of the things and the bits that we need to. But let's work to the strengths that we have here and utilize the great things that Canadian companies have done with local rights holders and stakeholders in regions to potentially develop the new elements of business that would be out there. And that's either getting back into processing, that's exploring for and developing new critical mineral deposits, and ensuring that we are acting as we have the fundamental basis now that we must in terms of consultation and consent with rights holders in regions.
I see we're getting close to the end of our time, so I'm going to ask you one last question. So looking back, what advice would you give to students who are exploring their careers and may not follow the straight line? And I'll tell you my non-straight line. I graduated in 1998, had a job, was replaced by somebody who got laid off a second year in EIT at Valet or Inco at the time, and I made pizza for 8 months till I found my first real job in mining. But yeah, many paths. So what advice would you give?
Be bold and be brave. I won't get the Latin phrase right here, fortuna fortis adjuvat. If I've pronounced that all correctly, I can't recall. But it was take risk. And that, I say from, as a young individual, I chose the hardest jobs for no other reason than I loved a great challenge. And I had a wife who supported that and a partner who supported that. We've been together for better than 30 years. And so having that support that you can make those hard decisions and do that is something that I think has been successful. And that's really led to a non-linear path. We talked about the anastomosing career of back and forth through different areas, but we talk about it over and over. I'm not sure, there were a couple of others that joined me from Laurentian University, but in 1996 to go and work for a private junior mining company, to get on a plane, didn't fly from Sudbury to Beijing in China at the time, which was not the China we know today, and then on a Russian plane to go and work in Mongolia for 6 months on a contract. I had no knowledge that they weren't paying me at the time. It was my now wife who was back here going, like, when's the paycheck coming in? So I had the luxury of making the hard decisions and going to do that. I didn't have to live at home with some of the consequences of that. So finding someone who's great in support is always beneficial. As you married Catherine, who was our neighbor, but having that support and being able to make those decisions and growing up with the support from a family that enabled you to make those decisions and to see other family members. Like I can remember my grandfather driving across Canada in his Chevy Van Dura because he was going off to speak somewhere or for some other engagement somewhere. He traveled a lot. So for me, traveling wasn't a foreign thing. So taking those opportunities and I would say, the network that you build. We have a group of graduates that we've gotten together at there's an annual convention for mining and prospecting and developing here in Canada. But we have gotten together every year, and in the beginning, we were talking earlier about, we would sleep 6 to 7 to 8 in the hotel room when we went down to this. Now we get together on the Sunday ahead of time. It used to be that the Sundays weren't busy, but we still get together as a group of about 6 or 7 of us, and many times it gets much larger with a whole bunch of other Laurentian University grads. So, I know Nicole's here, and Nicole comes out to a couple of them. Feel free to share with all of the other Laurentian grads that are out there. But taking those opportunities and being bold and taking those opportunities as one of the things that has led me to have that non-linear success in terms of the opportunities. And it's not just taking them. You got to work hard, and I think that's one thing. People always see it from the opposite side. It's really easy to look at success as an end product, but nobody looks at when you've got you work 4 10s, and your 5th day you volunteer so that you can get your underground Common Core, so I can do my leadership Common Core. Those were all things that I did on my own time. And so as it comes to that, I had an uncle who once said, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And I know it's a dad thing. I love these analogies, but I stayed true to that, and still today. Now, and having transitioned to career, now one of the things that I really look forward to doing is working with First Nations groups. So there's a couple of different groups that, it's my way of hopefully sharing some of that knowledge that I've gained over the period of time, and inspiring the next generation of First Nations kids that are coming through and going to school and saying, maybe I can do that too. I can see this little kid from Falconbridge who grew up playing on the muckers and the slushers in the park, who had a dream and continued to do that on their side.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that last inspiring, those very inspiring thoughts. I don't know if we have time for Q&A.
Yeah, do you mind if I grab the mic quickly? Yeah, sorry, just want to acknowledge everyone online too. Thank you everyone for an engaging conversation. I know we're going to have questions, so I do want to have an opportunity for folks to ask. And if you're online, please feel free to use the Q&A box. If you raise your hand, I'll come around and I'll bring you the mic, and you'll have an opportunity to ask your question.
And Lily, if I may add, si jamais quelqu'un avait une question en français, moi je me sentais complètement à l'aise pour parler en français et répondre à vos questions.
Merci. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Kristan and Neil. Sorry, that is making noise. The question I had for you is, you talked a bit about consent and what that looks like, and obviously, like in the regulatory world for both mining and energy, free and prior informed consent and treaty rights is like becoming more prevalent and more understood. So what does life cycle consent look like? So not just at the very beginning, but what does it look like at Wyloo, in your career?
It's funny because from a rights perspective and then a laws perspective. So in Canadian law now, it's something that's been passed. So there's a requirement in law to ensure that free and prior informed consent is gained. How that's spelled out hasn't really been worked out yet in terms of how that law exists today. I can only share what I think are best practices, but even the best practice comes from engagement with the community. So it's going to vary on a community by community basis. And when it comes through from a life cycle perspective, if it's a life cycle depending on the industry, so in my industry, of course, is the mining and the extractive resource sector. From that particular perspective, I think that there's now a growing expectation to move beyond IBAs. And for those of you in the space, if you met Sean Batiste from Waban Tribal Council, and I will parrot exactly what he said. IBA today is the rent that's paid to a rights holder's perspective, but it doesn't stop there. There's an expectation, and a rightful expectation, for First Nations and Indigenous communities to participate in the procurement activities and in the benefits that are accrued through all of the spin-off activities. Now, I know we didn't talk about that today, but a large portion of the last 15 years of my career have really been centered around agreements like that and growing those businesses and ensuring that First Nation and Indigenous groups are incorporated into that. So when it comes to consent, if there's a value proposition that can be, and I say that from a value, it's a balance, and it's from consultation with rights holders, with stakeholders, and developing what that value equation looks like. And you can't develop that if you don't have consent. I don't know the steps legally in terms of Canada and how that's going to evolve, because that will evolve. It has evolved over the last 5 years, the last 10 years. But I certainly know that if we engage with Indigenous people and include them in a meaningful way along that journey, that in itself brings on a certain level of consent. So from a life cycle perspective, I guess was the second half of the question, you can see that from a design perspective. So if you look at, and I'll use an example that's in the backyard here in Sudbury for the Nickel Rim South deposit, for which I didn't have any role in the design, but it is one of the smallest footprint operations that exist out globally. It has a fully captured water, any contact water from operations are captured and treated at that site. The rest is diversion. And it's extremely important. And I understand through the community consultation and the community information sessions, there were a lot of concerns raised from Wanapitei First Nation and other stakeholders in the area, because there's a cold water stream that has brook trout, speckled trout, that as a kid, I used to go fish with my father at that time when I was a little kid. But respecting that and ensuring that it demonstrates from a life cycle perspective that operations can exist beside our drinking water, that the risk can be fully understood, and the effective controls can be in place. And when those controls are in place, the community has a sense and an understanding that their rights are being protected through that. Then it takes a good operator and good engaged groups to make sure that happens.
So my question is following on her point, and it has to do mainly on, we're in a very interesting time right now, when politically there is a push for more momentum towards exploration and maximization of the mineral potential of the province. And we have had external consultants say that one of the problems in Canada is the speed of engagement. So how can you institutionalize all these wonderful things that you're talking about and at the same time meet those maximization of speed that is required to survive in a real world?
Again, and Jason's not the only one that'll say this, but just to the north of us, he would say that it's not the Indigenous groups or the First Nations group up north that are holding back the timelines. It really isn't. I think in our process, from a government and a bureaucrat perspective, we have to understand how we collect information, how decisions are made. So, if you speak to the folks from Waban Tribal Council, I can speak to the folks from Makivik, who I worked very closely with. When they're involved in the gathering of information, the synthesis and the information, both from a community and a scientific perspective, they're informed to be able to make a decision, and they can make a decision relatively quickly along those timelines. The challenge becomes in the governmental structures that we have, where the government, provincial government has one level of study that has to happen. The federal government has a different level of study that has to happen. They don't talk, and now we're just talking about two levels of government. We haven't introduced the complexity of the Department of Mines, Department of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change and Protection. You haven't talked about the Ministry of Natural Resources. So the interministerial engagement that happens today, while there are pledges to improve those things are still, we're waiting to see the product of that today. And I think those are some of the many things that can work to be streamlined. And the fact that you have to repeat work, I can share an anecdote from working with some of the First Nations that I've worked with in the past, where we have government that comes in and asks questions, and the leaders, the elders and the chiefs and councils will point to a library on the wall behind them in the band office that says that you're asking these questions, but the questions are all in the reports that you've given us that you asked the last time you were here. It hasn't changed. So from a governmental process, and it's not just a stick government, but we have to find a way, when you include right holders and stakeholders along the way for design, that's reflected in the permitting and the process that comes along. And today it's not. So I think that's one of the key things that will enable Canada to move in a much more efficient way. I think we have a question.
We are running a little bit short on time, so we'll take a question online, and then we'll see. I've seen a couple hands, so we'll see what else we could do.
So Bernie online is asking, Kristan, what are your thoughts on energy and environmental footprint through the mine life cycle as we electrify mines and possibly provide capacity support to our stakeholders?
Certainly, I think from a renewables perspective, as a part in my career, we built some of the first windmills on a mine site and had all of the I'm not going to blame the engineers, but all the engineering limitations of we can't incorporate this wind, like wind is so unreliable in terms of its generation. We managed to include all of it at a point in time, and then doubled the production of it, and then look to, again, increase that. And they're going through a decisions phase. So I think that there's a great opportunity there. And when you think about how communities work, a mine has a fixed life in it. We may not know that from the start, but generally when the decision is made to advance a deposit into production, it's with a 5 or a 10 or a 15 or a 20-year life span ahead of it. That's a perfect opportunity to marry another investment. And for energy and for renewables, you can pull together power purchase agreements. And when you build that power purchase agreement, there's an excellent opportunity for communities like Henvey Inlet did to then be the owner of the renewable energy generating or the generational assets that are there, for them to be able to have a life of 5, 10, 15, or 20 years of revenue that comes off of that. And then you have communities that are integrated into the supply for the business. And that, to me, makes it a very robust equation in through there. So that not everybody's at the end fighting over the faucet where it drips a little bit of profit out at the end, but you have rights holders and community members involved in the supply and the delivery. And maybe one day that rolls into equity, like you see with Canada Nickel up north.
Thank you so much. It is 1 o'clock now, and I know we have a lot of other great questions. I do invite everyone to stick around. We have food, we have bannock, we have drinks. So for those of you who are in person, please stick around, ask Kristan some questions. Neil is going to be here as well. But in the meantime, I do want to thank you both so much for coming up and speaking with us today. Thank you. Perfect, thank you. So I do want to thank you both so much. I want to give you a little something as well for taking the time and being here. So I'll give you that. And for 2 grads who are very engaged, and we do have, thank you, we do have, other alumni events coming up, community events, so please stay engaged, stay tuned, and again, we really welcome you to come around and stay engaged, update your contact info, and keep in touch. So we'll be here. Thank you, everyone. Merci. Miigwech. I almost forgot we have Pasqua coming back to close this off in a good way. There you go. Sorry, because we can't finish off the day without another beautiful closing remarks. Press it up. There you go.
Okay, there you go. Ani again. So this afternoon, I'm gonna do a quick blessing for everyone here to ask that everyone arrives home safe. And I wanted to say a couple words in my language. Danse gake ota na naskaman anoch kisaga kisemanto. Hi, hi. Gakio. Hiya, hey, hiya, ho, ho, ho. Hiya, hey, hiya, ho. Hiya, hey, hiya, ho. Hey, 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 oh, hey, 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 oh.